As we get started this morning, I don't know if you have ever had this thought, but I am always struck by the way that our culture connects with some of our holy days, our holy moments, and finds strange ways to celebrate these moments in our life, in our faith. And so I think of things like Easter egg hunts, and I go, where did that come from? And I think I have a way better tradition for us to start, and it comes from what we read earlier. Allie read it for us. We have some kids in here who would already excel at it. Carson, Carice, John, and the other disciple, pretty sure this is James, they have a track meet on Resurrection Sunday. And so from now on, in future years, when you enter the front door, you have to sprint into the sanctuary. I think we're going to start something like that. We'll have a track meet. These kids will blow us away. They've been practicing. Anyway, I was just struck by running. I mean, clearly, I'm a runner, so this is my jam. You guys can find other traditions that we can start as well that you'll enjoy as much as I will enjoy this one. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been rolled away. On the first day, Mary came early. It was still dark. To the modern ear, none of this really means that much, right? These are just details. It's Sunday morning, and it's Mary who comes around first, and it's really early in the morning. These are the kinds of details that flavor a story for us, that kind of draws us as modern readers in so we can picture ourselves in it. And we often wish the Bible would give more of these kinds of details. And yet, to the Jewish ears, these details are specific and they are explosive, packed with meaning. It's the first day, and it's still dark. We've been reading the Gospel of John together over the last 2 weeks, and you have hopefully noticed that John is obsessed with light and darkness. From the opening words of the book, we hear John saying things like, and these will be up on the screen, "In him is life, and the life was the light of men." Or, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." "I am the light of the world," Jesus says. "Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. "The light is among you for a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. The one who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become children of light." And the last one, "I have come into the world as light so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness," right? Point proven. I haven't even quoted all of them, but light and darkness. Life and light. Jesus is the light, and the darkness is the realm for those who love evil. Now we're dealing in metaphor here, and these are metaphors that I think we immediately connect with, and deeply, even if we're not Jewish or deeply shaped by sort of Jewish ideas. My family hates when our home is dark. You can find anyone in our house just by following the string of lights that have all been left on, from the upstairs to the downstairs. There are always too many lights on in my house. The girls do not like the dark. They intuitively associate it with something scary. When I was a kid, I went to this Boy Scout camp where I didn't know anyone. And so throughout the entire first day, I was already feeling really alone, and I didn't want to stay at this camp. But then night fell, and there was no moon out that night, and I could almost feel the darkness. It was so thick. And I remember that night just sitting in my tent crying because I felt so alone and isolated from everyone else. In the book of Revelation, there's this picture of 4 horses being released upon the earth, each bringing death and darkness. The first is a political tyrant who comes to conquer. The second horse is a war horse, indiscriminately killing anyone in its path. The third, a crashing economy where people starve as they can no longer afford to eat. And then the fourth horse is a plague that sweeps through the land. These horses, as the story goes, fill the earth with injustice. The righteous are killed alongside the unrighteous. And in Revelation, immediately following these 4 horses and their devastation is darkness. The sun becomes black as sackcloth. Darkness is an ancient language describing a realm where death reigns. A realm of chaos and disorder, a complete lack of life and order. Darkness is the realm where evil reigns. Think about the ways you've heard people talk about the last few years. Our world has endured brutal rulers and devastating wars and unstable economies and global plague. The 4 horses ride again. And so we've heard people talk about these dark times. I remember one of the earliest moments where I felt this darkness most profoundly. The girls and I were driving home from Oregon a couple summers ago, and protests demanding racial justice were breaking out everywhere. COVID was spreading, and fires had just broken out all over Northern California. And to get home from Oregon, we had to drive into this massive, thick, dark cloud. I mean, we literally drove from a bright, sunny day into this cloud of hazy smoke where everything was dark and you could hardly breathe and you could feel the darkness. And today, this was a couple years ago, today, right, we can hear stories about what armies around the world are doing to civilians. Almost weekly, there's another mass shooting in our country. The number of people taking their own lives out of despair is rising. Like, these are dark days, if we're being honest. And so we wonder if there's any light to be found. Earlier this week, I went to my barber. And Renee knows that I'm a pastor, and when I go in, she'll usually ask me what I'm going to preach about on Sunday. And as we talked about it a bit that morning, or that day, we talked about the resurrection. She asked, is it hard to come up with something new to say every year about the same event, the same passage? And I told her, not really. It's a message we never stop needing. To which she said, it's a message we really need right now. She told me she's been avoiding listening to the news lately. There's just too much darkness. And she's probably right. We actually probably have access to way more darkness than most people have had throughout history. And so the questions become very real for us, and they're important, right? Does Jesus have anything to say about the darkness of the world? Like, does Jesus have any power over the darkness? Does the light shine in the darkness? Or has the darkness overcome the light? This last question takes us right back into this morning's passage. On the first day of the week, Mary came to the tomb early while it was still dark. She saw that the stone had been taken away, so she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple. They have taken the Lord out of the tomb. Consider Mary's experience. Mary is living in darkness. She has devoted herself to Jesus for how many years? And there she is by his pierced side until the very end. She was part of this group that had invested everything in Jesus and his movement. They were filled with hope, big hope. And they had seen their movement swelling over time. And she had come to Jerusalem eager for Jesus to do this thing, to take his throne. She was ready to see God's people free from the Romans. But now, all of that had died. She had seen him arrested and beaten and hung on a criminal's cross. His movement was dead. His followers scattered. Her hope gone. Where would they go now? And what did they have left? Jesus had told his disciples that he was the light of the world. No one who followed him would walk in darkness, but would have the light of life. But in this moment, there is neither life nor is there light. And yet for Mary, she was experiencing only chaos and death and loneliness and failure. There was only darkness. In the same way that John's gospel routinely uses words with two different meanings, that's what he's doing here as well. It's physically dark because it's nighttime. The sun hasn't risen yet, but it's also dark in all of the spiritual and emotional ways that a moment can be dark. And where does Mary go in the darkness? The only place she knows to go after all this time with Jesus. She goes back to the one who she had hoped could be, would be the light. But it was still dark and about to get darker for her because the stone had been rolled away, and to her eyes, this could mean only one thing. Someone had taken the body of their Lord. We do not know where they've laid him, she says. The light of life has gone out, and now the light is nowhere to be found. And so Mary runs to her friends. This is all too much for her to bear alone. She invites others into this experience with her. And Simon Peter and the other disciple, they race to the tomb because they have to see for themselves. I'm struck by Mary's response. It's a response I've seen time and time again over the last couple years. This deep sense, right, that it is not good for us to be alone. It wasn't good for the very first human made by God to be alone, even though they were living in the light. How much worse for the human alone in the darkness? And so over the last couple years, people have reached out to each other, seeking each other out, finding ways to share their lives in the darkness. I wonder if just for a moment this morning, in the spirit of Mary, if we could share in each other's darkness. And so here's the question I want to pose to you. And if you have something that you'd be willing to just share out briefly, here it is. What's one thing that for you has made the last couple years feel especially dark? What's one thing that for you has made the last couple years feel especially dark? For me, it's been watching families torn apart over political loyalties. But I'm curious, would anybody be willing to just share something that's made the last couple years feel especially dark? Yeah, Russ.
Watching my nephew deal with PTSD and post-head trauma and Meniere's disease and multiple problems from military experience.
Rush said watching his nephew experience a variety of ailments from his experience in the military. Okay. Avery, homework. Thanks, bud. Whitney. Anxiety. Yeah, Judy. The fear of COVID. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Shavi. Oh, okay, Santi. Thanks for helping your brother out, bud.
Last year we heard that she was headed to the hospital. And she just got moved to an elderly place.
So losing somebody that you love.
She's up in Washington.
Okay. Thanks, Santi.
Demonstration of the darkness when you're finished.
Okay, cool. Shavi's got a demonstration of the darkness for us. Yeah, Meg.
At least one of every one of my friends' children, college-age children suffering with either anxiety or depression.
Just realized not everybody could probably necessarily hear. Meg's friends with college-age kids suffering from anxiety and depression. Yeah. Yeah, Charm.
For me, it is a lot of family members, including myself, that have experienced excessive trauma, and it tends to be ongoing. So that can be a bit of a stressor.
Yeah.
When I do have peace, it almost it's like a self-sabotage thing where it doesn't feel like I'm supposed to have it.
Yeah, Charm just said, like, in her family, there's just a lot of trauma. And then even in those moments where she's feeling free of it or feeling some peace, can find herself self-sabotaging. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Teresa.
I would say a lack of empathy and understanding from fellow believers, like social injustice and things like that, and people not being willing to from the other person's point of view and just love on each other.
Yeah. Teresa said a lack of understanding among believers and an inability to love each other in the midst of various issues. Yeah. Wow, thanks, you guys. Mary invites others into her darkest experience on the first day. But we are left wondering, is this the best we can hope for, right? To huddle together in the dark, hoping for the impossible, hoping the darkness just goes away. Well, Renee, my barber, thinks that there's more to the resurrection story, that there is real hope to be found, and so do I. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But what was first? What was before the light? When God spoke these words, we're told that the earth was formless and it was empty, and darkness was over the face of the waters. Darkness and chaos and a complete absence of life. Sound a little bit like Mary's early morning? On the first day of creation, in the face of chaos and darkness, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was that simple. And the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God's light ordered the darkness. God's light tamed the darkness. It put it to use so that life could now flourish in the world that God was making. This is exactly what's happening as Mary comes to the tomb on the first day of the week. See, this is no ordinary day. This is the first day. Just like the first day of creation, this is the first day of the new creation. God has begun a new world on this day. The world was still dark. The people, aimless, tomb, empty, and yet life and light had already overcome the darkness, even if Mary couldn't see it yet. Because God spoke, let there be light, and there was light. Even though Mary and Simon Peter and the other disciple, they didn't have the eyes to see it. Even though they didn't understand what they were looking at when they saw the empty tomb, the light had already defeated the darkness. Life had already emerged from death, just as life began for humans in a garden made by God. So Jesus, alive, shows up in a garden. It's incredible how the story unfolds, drawing on these stories of old. See, because Simon Peter and the other disciple, they come and they check out the tomb and they go home, but we find Mary weeping at the tomb here in the garden. And it's there that Jesus comes to her. This isn't the first time he's come to somebody weeping. But she doesn't know it's Jesus. See, something has changed. And this is like one of the most important parts of the story, I think. See, Jesus has been raised from the dead. And in a few verses, he's going to offer his wounds to Thomas, to see them and to touch him. Like, this is the very same Jesus who was hanging on the cross just a few days earlier, and yet something radical, something completely new has happened. Jesus has taken on a form that can be recognized, but not automatically, because it is altogether new. There's continuity and discontinuity at the same time. He can speak to Mary, and she can hear him, the same voice she's been listening to for some time, and she can mistake him for the gardener, and then he can say her name, Mary, and she could hear the intimate care of her shepherd. She could immediately recognize his voice. When I think of light and its relationship with darkness, it's interesting to me that light, it like doesn't do anything to the darkness. When light shows up in a dark room, the light just fills the space. Darkness merely ceases to exist. It disappears as the light replaces it. The light doesn't do anything to the darkness. It doesn't convert the darkness. It doesn't change the darkness. The light simply is, and darkness is dispelled. It's almost like the darkness has no real power. In a sense, this is what happens to Jesus in the tomb. He was dead, like dead. Death reigned in his body until life was turned on. The life of God's very own Spirit animated Jesus' body again, and death disappears from Jesus' body. Life now reigns, and there is no hint of death remaining in him. Life and death, light and dark. It's amazing how death and darkness are related, and light and life. This is not going to be the last time we see these ideas, these symbols connected. In the very final chapters of the Bible, Jesus will finish this new creation project that started on the first day. Go on to describe our final home. And we get the sense that it's a lot like Jesus' resurrection body. It's the same earth, but different. Recognizable, but very strange, new. We've already been told that sadness and pain will be gone. But then in the last chapters of Revelation, we find out that the work that started on the first day has finally been completed. That darkness and death, which were defeated on the cross and in the tomb, now, on the final day, are done away with. We're told that there will be no night. There won't be any need for a sun or a moon, for God himself, the very light and life that sustain us, that sustain everything, will be all we need. While it was still dark, God raised the light to new life. I love it. While it was still dark. So for those of us who are experiencing darkness, which is all of us, we're still in the world. Darkness still exists. It hasn't been eliminated. As long as the darkness still exists, we will feel it, encounter it, know it. But it's in the midst of that darkness that God raises the light to new life. It took Mary and the disciples time for their eyes to adjust to the light. But I wonder today, while it is still dark, where God might continue to speak forth a word of light and life. And I wonder, do we have the eyes to see the light when it shines? Can we see the new life emerging from places of death? How often do we show up to empty tombs, places of despair and discouragement, and not realize that God is at work in that place? How often do we hear the voice of somebody and mistake them for someone other than the very presence of Jesus in our lives, showing up, offering us the gift of a gardener, which is flourishing life? Will we, like Mary, having finally seen and experienced the risen Lord, go and announce to others what we have seen and experienced? Will we announce the light and the life of Jesus, replacing the darkness in the world? The ultimate picture of this is what we do together at the table every single week. The cross, right? The symbol that sometimes we wear on a chain. Sometimes people tattoo on their bodies. This symbol that we boldly display is an instrument of torture and execution. Right? Like, the cross is the ugliest, most hideous tool human beings have created that they used to tear apart the Son of God. There is no reason a cross should be a symbol that anybody would bear. And yet somehow, the truth, what Joseph spoke in the book of Genesis, still rings through. What you meant for evil, God purposed for good. So somehow, the ugliest, worst, most evil tool created became a sign, a symbol of God's beauty and love and glory. There's no easy explanation for that. There's no way to come to the table and sort of rationally explain all of the pieces that we eat, the broken body and shed blood of Jesus, that this is the death of somebody, but somehow it brings us life. But this is the tension. This is the invitation to meditate on these things, to consider them, to invest our entire lives in entering into this mystery, because in it, we encounter the risen Jesus, and he offers us life. And so, being unable to explain it perfectly, we just hear him say, "Do this in remembrance of me." And we come to the table and we consider the wickedness of sin that would put Jesus on a cross, and we consider the ridiculousness of a love that from that cross would say, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." The depths of sin and the depths of grace in the same symbol, in the same tomb. at the same table. So, this morning, as you come to the table and you consider Jesus died for your sins, may you consider those two things side by side, the depths of sin and the depths of grace. Can you receive them fully and meet Jesus who offers you new life today?